All right, again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much. We'll dive right into this. As I said, I have a ton of slides, lots of pictures, especially to cover to talk about all the birds, places, people, things we saw during this trip. We're going to be talking about Maine Audubon's trip that we just ran to Peru. Um, as a nice kind of overview or a good place to start. We've been doing a number of these trips partnering with Field Guides Birding Tours, which does birding trips worldwide. They are, I would say, one of the top, if not the best company to be traveling with. It's really kind of a nice combination that we have where, I would say Maine Audubon doesn't quite have the specialty or staff to be putting together full trips like this. So we get to use their specialties. I get to be a guide, and we get to bring Maine Audubon members on these private tours to places that we wouldn't be going to otherwise. It was fun to start these back in 2018. We were building up kind of a nice cadence, and then something happened in 2020. Uh, Pardon me, that really caused us to need to put these on hold for a minute. But it's been fun. Last year we offered a trip to Guatemala. This year we just completed Peru, so it'll be fun to build this back up. If you hang on till the end, I've got my little teaser. Um, we've got a nice, fun announcement of some trips that we're going to do in 2025 and 26, at least that are on the books already. So to zoom maybe out a bit, I'll zoom out even further in a second, I guess. This was the goal of the trip. Peru is a huge country, and we were covering kind of this area from Cusco up to Machu Picchu, um, really trying to add in that cultural component to this trip. I'm a big fan of the website thetruesize.com, especially we all know how global maps do a funny bit of stretching some areas versus others. And then to do this overlay, at least trying to get Maine in most of this. So the outline you're seeing here is the size of Peru. And really, I just wanted to show off what a massive country it is. 34 million people live there. Um, Certainly quite a bit larger than well, as you can see, it stretches, almost the size of the our eastern seaboard. To orient ourselves a little geographically here, you're about 3,800 miles as the crow flies, just drawing that straight line. The fun thing to look at on this map is just almost how straight vertical that is. I guess the fun point being here that it helps you realize how much South America is really east. We're in the same time zone, at least, excuse me, Maine is for any folks listening from out of state. Maine is in the same time zone as Lima, where we flew to. I'll maybe make the quick recommendation or plug here that it's not the easiest place to fly to, at least in my experience, the flights that I found. Went from Portland to Atlanta and then down to Lima. And unfortunately, most of the US to Peru flights seem to be happening fairly late at night, which I guess I'll just say is maybe a helpful thing to know if you're traveling down there. You almost need to set aside well, certainly a full day to travel, despite the flights not actually being that long. Another fun maybe place to start before we look at the individual places we went is to just realize um, what amazingly diverse habitat. Again, this is a very large country, and to realize, part of the reason that they have so many birds, I'll show you that slide in a second, but it is largely because, well, they're fairly close to the equator. Um, Much more tropical than a lot of what we see. But when you then realize also the diversity of habitats that they have here, And especially realizing like I had no idea that Lima, hard to see on this tiny map here, but where I'm moving my cursor, Lima being right on the coast is actually all desert along there. Um, we spent very little time around Lima because the trip immediately started by taking an in-country flight to Cusco. But to realize that you're going from this, truly desert transitioning as you go up over the Andes into this dry forest, up to the steppe, um, into the Puna, the grasslands, as we'll see, will be this is some of the areas we'll be talking about where we were birding. And then there's actually like tundra, and the it's a little hard to see on here, but labeled in white is the permanent ice. There's glaciers up in those mountains, again along the Andes throughout this part of Peru. Then, just to point out, once you get over the Andes and start going down in elevation again, you're and especially going into Brazil, you're into the Amazon basin. You're really looking into that, uh, excuse me, those incredible forests that are running that whole way. And then just kind of a fun cross section to realize here, a lot of the birding that we did on this trip was kind of in this, as you'll see, the Puna grasslands, this inter-Andean valleys. We'll talk about how we went and really worked some of these different slopes, but a fun thing to kind of realize that cross section of the country. As I alluded to before, Peru has an insane number of birds. This chart, sorry if it's small in any of your screens, but this is looking at eBird, the citizen science project run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where people report what birds they see. Um, Number of checklists. Yes, the United States, lots of people use eBird here compared to the rest of the world, but based on the number of species in all these countries, Colombia currently sits at number one with a little over 1,900 species, but right on their tail at 1,877 species in just the country of Peru is pretty incredible. There are a load of birds there. So, anyways, let's talk about our tour more specifically here. As I said, our first day, everyone met up in Lima, and then the next morning we had a fairly early flight to get to Cusco. Boarding a little differently than you might be used to in the U.S., but really kind of an easy, excuse me, in-country flight. Some absolutely stunning views again as we're getting really up into elevation. This is looking just out the window. Some absolutely insane peaks. Many peaks in the country reaching well over 20,000 feet. And here's just our view flying into Cusco. Definitely a little bit of a change of scenery. Now, this next map, um, even after being there, I'll say this is kind of a funny way to look at it. So down here, just below center, is Cusco, where we were flying into. To maximize our birding in the area, we actually started by going southeast a little bit, hitting a few hot spots before we would then work our way up to the northwest, ultimately getting up into Machu Picchu being one of our big destinations. And then, as we'll talk about, excuse me, getting up into the Sacred Valley and working some of these different slopes up here. So Wakarpai was the first place we went to, especially trying to hit some of these lakes that are up at elevation. Um, Absolutely incredible scenery everywhere you go. Again, because of the really tall mountains, the quite different overall appeal to what you'll see in Maine. Psychologically, I was always told in these talks to put in photos of people because you can now envision yourself on these tours. So, um, jokes aside, this was our one of our first stops birding. The fun thing about stepping, outside of the van in a new country, in a new habitat, is you just start racking up new birds everywhere. The fun thing is that a lot of the same niches that we think of birds occupying, even here in Maine, if you're going to go to, the edge of a big lake where there's, all these sedges and rushes and things growing up on the edge, you're going to expect things like blackbirds. We think of red-winged blackbird. Well, down there they have yellow-winged blackbird, where we would have something like a marsh wren going around. They have the wren-like rushbird. Just like you would expect maybe Virginia rail to be walking around, plumbeous rail down there. American robins hopping on the grass on the edges, wow, Chiguanco thrush. A lot of these birds have some very fun multisyllabic names. Maybe you'd look around the edges for hummingbirds visiting flowers. We might, in Maine, we really only get ruby-throated, but some of the train bearers, this one being a female, hard to tell the species apart, but they have increasingly long tails, especially the males are almost unbelievable. Looking up in the sky, instead of, a hawk or an eagle flying around, they have black-chested buzzard eagle. Very cool, funky looking raptor with these very short tails on them. And then there's going to be things that are completely unique. This bird being called rusty-fronted canistero. For any endemic species, I've tried to include a map here. I know not being too familiar with the country, this might be fairly out of context, but just to realize these endemic species, meaning that they only occur in Peru. That is the only country in the world that you can see them. And to realize like this, I should have put one in with like a global view to, this is an incredibly range restricted species. So, especially from a birder's standpoint, you always like to try to get as many endemics as you can. The fun thing with this, where the last handful of species we've talked about, you probably recognize at least the families. Canistero, you're certainly never going to hear of being in Maine. They fall in this really cool, really diverse family called the Furnarids, which is a very large, very diverse family, 318 species in them. If you can see that map, they basically range from Mexico and then down south all across South America. So if if there's a bunch of birds in here in this slide deck that you're thinking, geez, I don't even know what that is, there's kind of a funny chance that it's probably a Fernarid. As we go birding around, this was the large van that we had. Roadside snacks. If we weren't going to restaurants or buffets, we usually had packed lunches. This first one really got things kicked off kind of amazingly. You definitely don't lose weight on these tours. I feel like, uh, uh, yeah, you're never at a loss for food. So these wonderful packed lunches that they had for us, um, even with some great local cuisine. Excuse me. The causa here is a layered Peruvian potato dish, usually potatoes, chilies, avocados, sometimes something like tuna or boiled eggs and onions. Um, Highly recommend it. Again, as you can see spelt there, causa. Um, that's one. I'm not much of a chef, but I would love to figure out how to make that. Certainly, chocolate mousse. It seemed like every day we had like three sandwiches packed, which was fantastic. The funny one, if you're noticing in the back, these were put together by, I guess, the driver. And there's a small bottle of wine included in all of them, which is always a nice, funny touch, um, at least for dinners later. So now we're working our way northwest. Slowly getting towards Machu Picchu. Fun to just do some roadside birding. And this is where, hiring um, local guides or, for us, Jesse Fagan was the guide from field guides. We did the Guatemala tour with him. We went to Costa Rica with him. He actually lives in Peru, so a lot of these places he knows like the back of his hand. And so as we're just driving around, he can say, "Oh, pull over here, get out." An absolutely incredible landscape. This is the Again, pardon my pronunciation on a lot of these. The Urubamba, Urubamba, the Urubamba River, cutting through here. That's basically the river you'll see in a lot of these slides. The fun thing, looking down in there, we'd get our first torrent ducks. Well, better photos of these later, but to just realize like the habitat that these birds live in is absolutely incredible. These fast flowing rivers. That's an appropriately named species, the torrent duck. Male on the right, female on the left. One of our big targets here was this bird called white-winged cincloides. Not an easy one to photograph, way down on the edge of the river, but you can see how it gets its name with those little white patches on the wing. Um, Getting us into a whole afternoon drive to get us into our first kind of hotel where we'd be staying. This was in the town. Love these names. Oyo Taitambo. Birding the grounds. There were a few new species. Again, that's one of the fun things on these trips. You're just kind of racking up new things everywhere you go, especially in a country like Peru where you have 1,900 options. You can visit the same place over and over and pretty much always be finding something new. Just to zoom in, you might be able to see it over Gail's head here, but one of the absolutely incredible things just traveling around is not only the incredible scenery just in these tall mountains, but there's so much, um, I guess what I'll just call evidence or remains of Inca culture everywhere. So just looking up the hillside, you'll see, these essentially ruins that have been left behind. Some of them much more what I'll call a touristy destination where you can actually do tours and go walking through here. But even just, as you're driving around the country, you would see kind of all sorts of leftover evidence. Walking around those grounds, always fun to see some species, again, kind of occupying the niches of some of our more common birds. I had so much fun looking at these, as given away here by the label. Eared dove looks so much like our mourning dove. Aside from the tail being a little bit shorter, um, this was a fun one. I kept looking at him and thinking, like, man, if that bird showed up at Gilsland Farm at our feeders on a bird walk, like, would I even know it? Um, a fun split recently. Northern and southern house wren were split into different species. Just recently, they were just considered one for a long time. So now, as folks might notice, if you use eBird, if you've reported one recently, in the United States, we now call them all northern house wren, but down in Peru, it's a southern house wren. Then some big, showy, absolutely gorgeous species. I big fan of these showstoppers. The black-back grosbeak with that bright yellow underside, and definitely, reminiscent of if you think of our rose-breasted grosbeak with that gross beak, that huge, large, heavy bill. A tough one. We worked several minutes, felt like forever trying to get this bird, Peruvian pygmy owl that was tooting up a storm. You can maybe see it's starting to just lightly drizzle a little bit here, and especially to be looking up in this tree that's backlit. This tiny owl was very hard to pick out, but finally showed off for us. Pygmy owls are funny. They're diverse. They're all over. There's tons of different species, but they all look identical. So kind of funny to put in that much effort, but fun to see. And then one of our biggest targets was this bird here. known to be on the grounds of the hotel we were staying at, or the lodge, I guess is the better thing. I wouldn't call it a hotel. Um, the place we were staying, this incredible hummingbird called the bearded mountaineer, a quite large species, especially with that large, very long tail with the big white outer tail feathers. It was definitely one of my most wanted species to get on this trip. So nice to be at a place that they're reliable, especially because while they're known to be there, they're not always there. Field guides ran a tour covering the same area back in, it was either June or July of this year. Dan Lane led that tour, and they missed the Mountaineer. It wasn't there. As the map indicates, this is another endemic bird. Um, I forget the number now off the top of my head, but we had uh, 26, I think, different hummingbirds on this trip, as you'll see in photos to come. Um, I really tried to not include just tons of photos of food, but I will say the Peruvian cuisine is absolutely incredible. This was a quinoa soup um, with just tons of vegetables, absolutely delicious, especially being up at elevation. There were some areas that were definitely a little colder than I was expecting for being down there, but so a good soup always went a long way. If you're scratching your head trying to guess what kind of meat this little steak is here, when you know the expression "when in Peru, do as the Peruvians." So tried alpaca for the first time. Not sure I would recommend it. I think I know why it hasn't taken off as a global cuisine. Um, but nice to be eating local, I'll say. The other kind of funny thing, in the nice assortment of teas, you'll probably recognize lots of the options up here, but coca tea, the same coca leaf or coca plant that you might know from old Coca-Cola used to use extracts of this in their recipe. Um, but a very nice tea to have to especially help with altitude sickness. One thing, a bit of advice I'll give, typically not brewing a lot of the, oh, and sorry, just in the chat, those are coca leaves, straight coca leaves. So you could get it in a tea bag here, but those are actually just the straight leaves off the coca plant. So um, if you don't want them floating around in your tea, but that was kind of a great way to start the morning. My advice, as someone who, if I haven't had my coffee in the morning, I'm not reading every sign that I see. Essence of hot coffee is very different from hot coffee. It is basically just a super, well, it's very concentrated. So the idea was you would pour a little bit of this, add it with some hot water. Unless you're not paying attention, then you just get the thickest, worst coffee you've ever had in your life. So fun little cultural differences. But hey, that was one way to get a lot of caffeine in your system. From where we were, in order to get to Machu Picchu, we needed to take the Inca Rail to take a train to get there. So what we did, we could leave a lot of our luggage behind. The goal is to go up to Machu Picchu just for what I guess was 2 nights. Um, so just needing to pack, very lightly, taking, minimum things with us. And then you can see the train back here that we'd be boarding. Um, Oops, sorry, some of these videos uh, previews load upside down, which is annoying. But as you can see, us and a ton of tourists, this is definitely the primary way to get, um, excuse me, to Agua Calientes, the town kind of at the base before you get up to Machu Picchu. Um, Here's the same river. The train basically follows this the whole way there. fun to be looking for torrent ducks and dippers and other cool species along the way. A fun thing to see was one of the trailheads, depending on where you want to start, for the Inca Trail. This is one of the kind of famous ways to get to Machu Picchu if you want to go more on foot. Um, the traditional way, or I guess what's called the classic trail, most people, when you hear about them hiking in, the classic trail takes 4 or 5 days, but there are some of these different I think there's 3 different trail options now, with the shortest one only taking about a day to do. Instead, we were taking the train, and that was the easier way to get to again Aguas Calientes. Once there, great to have local knowledge that you can get essentially right on a bus and not need to wait in some incredibly long lines, especially if it's a little rainy. Unfortunately, this is what the weather was like when we took that bus ride up to Machu Picchu. A little bit of rain, kind of on and off most days, but then after waiting in lines, we would eventually get to the ruins here. I'll point out, and I've got this on another map to show. You can see the sign here, Circuit 2. Machu Picchu has received such an increase in visitors that it's actually becoming a bit of a problem. I guess definitely the concerns of being too much damage done to the area. So now it's very kind of strictly run. There's 3 different circuits that you can go on of basically a predetermined route that you have to walk to get through and kind of see the whole thing. This was our view, actually one of our better views as we arrived. With that bad weather coming through, we had very low visibility. Often at times not even able to see the ruins, especially to realize like there's some pretty big mountain peaks back here. You can just see them barely showing through. Um, but we got to focus on kind of going on the tour. An absolutely incredible place to realize what was built and what was made up here. Again, this was kind of a famous site for the Inca. This is a good time for me to introduce. We also, along with Jesse, who works for Field Guides, we hired a local guide. This is Ra, R-A. Um, who did a great job teaching us a lot about kind of the culture and history, not only of the Inca and Machu Picchu, but he was with us throughout almost the entire tour. Uh, One thing you'll see a lot throughout these slides, I'll point it out at maybe 1 or 2 other times, is just I know in Maine we love the expression if you don't like the weather, give it a minute or wait 5 minutes. Um, Yes, I know that you can apply that to just about anywhere, but certainly in Peru, it was amazing to me, and you'll see this happen in a lot of photos, especially um, what looks like almost completely different days can happen in just a couple minutes with some of the systems that move through, especially throughout the mountains here. So we did get lucky; it did clear, at least mostly for us, but pretty amazing to see. I will say, for both the sake of time and interest in this talk, I will not go through kind of the whole history, other than to say here, we made it. It is absolutely incredible to realize in this, um, high up in these mountains, this sacred place that must have taken just kind of unbelievable amount of effort, and then this especially level of detail with the stonework. I'll point it out in some other slides. You can basically tell in different areas the amount of effort, some of this here being the agricultural areas for this for Machu Picchu. You can really see, kind of the queue forming here. This is one of the circuits with all the tourists. This is one of the best places to be taking photos. That's why there's that many people packed right on there. That is like the classic view as we saw in the last slide. Um, Ra's estimate was that while we were there that day, which this was towards the, mid to late November, we were there, and outside of the peak season for them. And Ra's guess was that while we were there, there were over 3,000 people at the site. So you can imagine what it's like during its peak. Looking down the valley, you can almost see, I'll try to outline it a bit with my cursor here. You can see some of these switchbacks as the road goes back and forth, back and forth. Here's another turn coming back, another turn going down. You can just barely see them cutting throughout the forest. Here's the Urubamba River, and then the train actually going along the edge here. Um, if you are scared of heights, don't like narrow roads, this is maybe not the best place for you. This was a fun one. We had, I think accidentally, the eBird track was running kind of the whole day throughout there. So you can actually see where we came in on the train, got into Aguas Calientes, came down, hopped on the bus that took us up here, and then what I like about this is I think it shows, these are the necessary switchbacks to gain all that altitude, to then get up to the ruins where Machu Picchu is. Um, that was probably one of my biggest things that I didn't quite realize. Like, I knew there was a train involved. I had heard that you didn't have to hike all the way up, but to realize that, like, even once you're on the bus, it is kind of this very remarkable kind of switchbacks, getting up there. Um, as Susan asked, which biome are we in? So this is, it is heavily forested here. This is definitely more humid slope. I don't know that trying to think what this would actually be called. Rainforest might not quite be right because I think we're a little still too high for that. Um, but it was still heavily forested through here, so I'd have to think about the right answer to that. And then just to show, this is kind of the whole track that we had to walk, but still, despite it being largely closed off, you do get to still work your way through the vast majority of the ruins. Of course, some really cool birds up there as well. This day was mostly focused on culture and getting to see the ruins, but things like Sierra and Elenia showed off nicely. Um, we actually had a fairly rare bird, rare for Machu Picchu, but fun to see. This was a cliff swallow flying around. A bird that could have been in Maine breeding, that past summer, but considered a rare species, especially up at elevation like that. It was fun to go on eBird and realize there was only one other record of cliff swallow at Machu Picchu, and it was another field guides tour, October of 2019, that Dan Lane had. They didn't get a photo, so maybe we can take the credit for having the um, first photo documented record for that location. Some species were herd only, so I thought I would at least, show at least records here. White-eared solitaire, a very tough species to see. They love being kind of high up, hard to see, but a cool one, a very cool song. Inca wren, endemic species, easy to hear, hard to see. We would get this later in the trip, but just heard it while we were at the ruins. Um, Andean cloud forest. Thank you. That is cloud forest was a better the exact word I'm looking for. Thank you, Kate. Again, food. Oh my God, amazing food. Um, anyways, uh, our next day, we were going to take a longer hike. This was into what's called the Mondor Valley. Um, the goal was at least 5 miles is what it takes to hike this, and just trying to show what an absolutely stunning kind of scenery this is here. Again, kind of always working the river, again, torrent, ducks, dippers, you name it. Um, but our goal was to basically start hiking away from uh, excuse me, away from Aguas Calientes, where, it's remote, but it's still fairly developed. So the further we could kind of get away from the town, more into this undisturbed, again, thank you, Kate, for to undisturbed Andean cloud forest, um, the better chance we had for especially some of the more uncommon species. Fun to start hiking right away and run into things like cinnamon flycatcher. Sorry if the audio is a little bad on these. Some videos, I forgot to mute it. Very fun little spastic flycatcher, huge eyes on it. Uh, some fun thrushes, pale-eyed thrush here. Um, Appropriately named species, all dark bird. This one, I know it's singing, but you can barely hear it. This was taken with my phone mounted to the spotting scope. Um, Remarkable what we're able to do nowadays. We were largely walking along the road that a lot of the buses use, which was fairly treacherous at some points. Those buses are really determined to get lots of people up and down to Machu Picchu. But then we would take this little side road, um, again on our quest to get into the Mandor Valley. Then from there, we would basically be walking along the edge of the railroad, where it obviously says not to walk, but also kind of funny to realize the number. You can see like there's a little shop that's popped up here. This is such a popular route, especially for those people that are hiking to Machu Picchu. Um, Maybe coming all the way from Cusco. This is a very heavily used trail. Um, Narrow at some places. Again, you can see like here's some old, uh, um, oh, what's the word for it? Old evidence of the Inca there. I guess it's back around this side. Actually, maybe you can see it right up here. I think is looking up at Machu Picchu. Um, Here's why you don't want to be walking on it too much. Obviously, lots of trains coming by, um, but fortunately, you can hear them coming from a long ways. There's that same view. All day long, we're listening to parakeets flying by, especially mitered parakeets. Some of the more specialty species, things like black-streaked puffbird. Nice of this one to live up to its name and puff itself up for this video. Again, not a family we're gonna see too much of here in Maine. I swear some birds they just give the most bizarre names they can to, but Oleaginous hemisphingus was a fun one to be looking for down there. Not endemic, but definitely a trickier species to find, and this would be kind of the only habitat that it would be possible for us on the trip. So nice to be able to connect with it there. Slightly more common species, but we love a little color. The saffron crown tanager. I love warblers, you name it, and especially some of these the non-migratory warblers. We think of all the neotropic migrants that come up to Maine for the summer, but some of these resident species like rufous crowned warbler, pale-legged warbler, um, fun to kind of see them doing their thing down there. Uh, Blue-gray tanager is a very common species kind of throughout Central into South America. The fun thing to see there is that it's actually a different race. So this was um, especially in Costa Rica when we did that trip a few years ago. Saw tons of blue-gray tanagers, but they were all blue and gray. And these ones down, especially up in the Andes here, have this cool white patch on those wing coverts. All sorts of flycatchers that are hard to tell apart, but ashy-headed tyrannulet actually was a pretty cool, more marked, fun species. Some absolutely stunning day-flying moths around. Still haven't figured out exactly what species this is. At least got the family, but or the genus. But fun to see those long feathery antenna on it versus some butterflies, a South American tropical buckeye just feeding on some minerals on the ground. Hiking around things like dusky green or pendula with this big bromeliad. Again, kind of giving that nice nod to the cloud forest here. Not the best photo, but one of the coolest birds, versicolored barbet, with that absolutely incredible red on the head, that big barbet bill. Very cool species. Here's this bird was flagged as rare. Not exactly sure why. Maybe a little out of range, but more likely a seasonal thing. Flagged as rare in eBird as we were reporting it. But ash-browed spinetail. This is another one of those furnarids that I was talking about earlier. So again, thinking about what a cool, diverse family those are. Andean solitaire, this was a species that we would hear a lot more than we'd see, much like that white-eared solitaire I mentioned earlier. Um, Always funny, they'd be so vocal high up in the trees, and then all of a sudden, this was a bird that just perched and landed right next to us for a few minutes, or excuse me, a few seconds. Um, Back down in the river, I mentioned the species white-capped dipper. Fun to be seeing them doing what dippers do, catching fish in those rapid waters. And then here's our torrent ducks again, really showing off well. Nice to not be on a moving train and get to see them up close. The male on the right, female on the left. And you might have noticed, especially in that last photo, you can see it in the background here a little bit. Um, the river definitely flowing quickly, but very brown. It was because of all the rain. This was not quite the rainy season, but kind of just starting. So we were noticing definitely a bit, as you'll see probably in the next few slides. We had quite a bit of rain, and again, saw the evidence of it as well in the river. Here's that rain. So that afternoon, we were going to do a little birding around the grounds of the place we were staying in Aguas Calientes. Um, we definitely lucked out because we did over 7 miles on that hike. This was one of our longest hikes of the trip. And the fact that we were able to get back and stay dry and then have this end up being our afternoon was at least good timing for us. Getting to that next day, we started early by checking out. Noticed still a little bit of rain, unfortunately, but there were some feeders on the grounds where they were putting out fresh bananas. Trying to zoom in here. So, a bunch of euphonias, tanagers, chlorophonias. Always helpful when you've got a bunch of fresh fruit to bring in birds for you. Then we would do a little hike on the grounds. Really pretty amazing trail system that they've built throughout this property. Getting to see some cool species. Again, this is another Fernarid. I can't quite understand this. Oh, sorry, I thought that was longer. I've got another video of it singing. But montane wood creeper. Again, to have this family of things that act like some of them act more like thrushes, some of them act like woodpeckers. It's a very cool, diverse group. Speaking of diversity, this was one of the highlights on this walk. Um, a real showstopper, our Andean cock of the rock, these two males. I think I've got a better video here. So these two males displayed right over the trail in front of us. One of the nice, bits here. You can bet on a birding tour. We're gonna stay in the places, much like with that bearded mountaineer we were talking about. Um, Also, staying on the grounds of a place that has a known cock of the rock lek is pretty helpful. Also helpful for one of the more secretive species, quail doves are just really hard to see. Maybe not the top of people's want lists. These, you know, doves and pigeons not being the most charismatic of species, but white-faced quail dove. Jesse knew a place on the grounds where they actually put out rice to try and feed some different birds and other things that would come into it. So, um, excuse me, we had this white-faced quail dove that perched up nicely for, I think, uh, uh, mostly everyone throughout the group got to see it. We had to split up into different, um, excuse me, different groups to get around to see this feeding area. But nice of that one to perch up for us. A bird we would see a bit more commonly, but Andean motmot. Motmots have these long tails. This one, unfortunately, that one of those tails was broken off, but with these long, interesting little pendulums that hang off the tips. Uh, Lovely to have feeding stations around to attract things like sparkling violet ear. The iridescence on this bird is just absolutely incredible. These large hummingbirds like Gould's Inca, excuse me. And that would wrap up our time up in Machu Picchu. So taking the train back out of there, back to Ollantaytambo. Um, the One of the coolest things, the train had to stop to let another train go by. Folks were looking up, discussing, I think, a plant that they were seeing out the window, and Jesse leaned to see what the commotion was about and happened to spot. This is probably one of the worst photos I've ever taken. Excuse me, but
Condor.
there were two Andean condors circling kind of high up on the mountain ridge. That we were able to spot from the train, which I love just thinking like the amount of luck that goes into so much birding and all of this is absolutely incredible. But there was our view, uh, at least photographed through the glass on the train of our Indian condor. I'll do this next part. We'll kind of pick up pace a little bit. We're going to be birding an area called the Sacred Valley. This is getting us up kind of into some of the highest elevation that we would see. So um, in the Sacred Valley, we're going to basically work the two different slopes, and then on a third day do the highest elevation. Just to show, this is we're back with our driver now. This is what our van looked like. We would take turns each day, different groups of people getting to load first. But an absolutely kind of incredible area. This was a fun place we stopped at, looking at some of the more traditional houses up there, just built with stone and these thatch roof. Jesse pointed out how the government over the last few years has been doing a lot of effort. Uh, a lot of houses are switching over to metal roofs. He said it's just been in the last 3 years, I believe, that they got electrical lines. So to see telephone poles or excuse, well, electrical poles going up through the valley was a new thing. Um, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting the years wrong, but there's also a big push before that to get solar panels um, to a lot of the people living up here. So I don't think I put in a photo with it, but a lot of these would just have like kind of a single solar panel, solar array, probably connected to a battery. But um, that's what a lot of the housing is like up in this area. We stopped at this one place, which is now uh, excuse me. So I'll take a step back and say, this woman posing with Jesse, and I'll say Jesse is a tall guy. I think he's like 6'4", anyways. Um, this woman, Maxima, definitely a little shorter, as many of the native people in the region are, but definitely love seeing the disparity between their height. This is where Maximo lives, just down the road. They've opened a restaurant there. I think a fun thing, you can almost see it in the background here, Starlink satellite. So they have high-speed internet available there, but Maximo's a wonderful host. We use the restrooms there. She brought us out these wonderful, just warm potatoes. Potatoes are definitely the most abundant crop being grown up there. And while I wouldn't normally think that just a straight potato, no butter, no salt, no ketchup, but just a warm potato on a cold morning up in the Andes was probably one of the greatest welcoming snacks we could have asked for. Trout farming is a very big popular thing up there. That's where a lot of the food is coming from, and a lot of them also being made into fish meal. So we'd see a lot of these trout farms, and there's one at Maxima's place here as well. Just to show a bit of what the scenery looked like here. Again, just the Andes are absolutely incredible, kind of gorgeous views everywhere you look, especially, some of the highest peak, excuse me, in this Urubamba mountain range is this one called Mount Veronica. Veronica stands at 19,226 feet. So no place that we were going to climb. But when the weather was clear, you would always have these kind of stunning looks up at Veronica. Um, the birding around there, again, new habitats, new species. Red-crested cotingas were especially common, I guess, in the right locations. Flower piercers, we would see a couple species, but black-throated being one of the more beautifully patterned. Not the greatest photo, but chestnut-breasted mountain finch. It's fun anytime, so many of these birds just have way too many parts of their names. But chestnut-breasted mountain finch, a nice endemic species, as you can see by the inset map here. Um, this was what some of the habitat would also look like. Working these valleys, you can see these little streams kind of running through here, looking upslope from us. You can see a bit of this grassland, and this is what's called puna, the puna grasslands, that have some really special species that occur in them. And here's a great view of one of them. This is a little canistero. These were tough birds to get good looks at. But we would use our some of our magic tricks to try and lure these birds a little bit closer to us. But Junin canistero, that's what this little bird is here, being up in the puna. But eventually one would come down close enough that we would get a decent look at it. Again, another endemic species. Kind of fun to see, literally on the other side of the road. So Junin canistero up on those in that in the Puna, then down kind of in the valley, streak-throated canistero. So to realize like having these two canisteros basically on opposite sides of the road, it makes you really appreciate like um, how specialized some of these species are. You can see they do, this one does get just down into Bolivia a little bit, so not quite endemic, but still a really cool species for us to pick out. Talk about switchbacks again, not quite as insane as getting up to Machu Picchu, but just to show this is the landscape we're birding. You can see here's one of the houses that has switched over to the metal roofs. Lots of farming for potatoes going on down in the valley here. And again, just awesome to see. Here's what I mean. This was taken the same day, I think within an hour apart. And just to see, yeah, maybe I bumped up saturation. It looks like a little bit, but it can go from beautiful and sunny to overcast and gray pretty quickly. Um, I just love this photo of this local woman, probably her land back here. You can see the potato farming. What you've maybe seen in the background of a few photos are all the alpaca around. And then some absolutely gorgeous dogs. Um, you would probably think acting, a little stray. They were always looking for handouts. Didn't help that we were always giving them some, stale bread or whatever we had. But these are true working dogs. There are a lot of them around, but they are basically all keeping their eyes on the alpaca that are around. Um, so certainly fun to see, just driving around, you would get these huge herds. These are all alpaca on this slope, just again, as we're driving, looking through. Slightly more close up to face anyone could love, I guess. Um, I'll talk more, I guess, a bit about alpaca fur towards the end when we talk about a little bit about cultural stuff. But really fun to see them, such a common species on the landscape there. Uh, Having some mid-morning coca tea to keep us going. I just want to throw that in to say, like, our goal is to keep people comfortable on these tours, and little tea went a long way. Some other new species, things like mountain caracara. This one flew over us holding what I guess was some sort of rat or something, that very long, thin tail on it. We looked for some special species in this habitat, Paramo pipit. Paramo is kind of a reference to a similar habitat that's more uh, unforested, no trees growing, but not quite the grasslands of the punas. Um, we lucked into, we had these distant views, and then this one came and landed briefly, but right next to us just for a second. And then, fun to see some of these other flycatchers, things like rufous-breasted chat tyrant. One of my favorite species. I love shorebirds, and getting to see high up in the Andes here, the appropriately named Andean lapwing. Lapwings are these large plovers. Um, Fun to spot this one. And then always funny to realize kind of some of the downsides of birding the countryside when all of a sudden, excuse me, here's Ken and some cattle. This cattle came kind of roaming over to us. We're giving it all the space it needs, but for some reason it decided that the best place for it to stand was right between us and that lapwing. So managed to get an okay photo, but always funny when you're looking down at a couple horns. Anyways, we know when to turn around. Some people just seem to have all the luck. Here's Kit with a couple alpaca, including this cute little one. Um, I say she has all the luck because I had some of the worst luck, it seemed. Instead of adorable alpaca roaming over to me, we made this one stop where all of a sudden these two pigs, this very protective boar right here, you can't see the sow is somewhere off picture here. Instead of just walking through and leaving us alone, this boar decided to walk right up to me, even started sniffing and pushing at my shoes. It actually bit the top of like the toe of my shoe. Unfortunately lost interest quite after that because I wish I could have seen what my heart rate was doing at the time because that was a big boar. Anyways, no problem. One thing I'll just mention, being at this kind of on this high elevation pass, we're always watching the weather and how it can change. As I mentioned, it changed every 5 minutes, it seemed. But here's the view. Again, remember those switchbacks I was pointing out? So this is basically a straight cliff down this way. And you can see the visibility our driver was working with. The funny thing was, as much as I had kind of the white knuckle grip on the van, this is why we hire local drivers for these because, well, they know what they're doing. So that was working. Excuse me, the dry slope that day. The next day we would make that same trip all the way up, go up over the pass, and then start working this side. Notice the difference here. So now we're on the humid slope. This is the slope that's going to go all the way down into the Amazon. So a whole different suite of birds. And that was really a remarkable thing, and why, again, they have such excuse me, the biodiversity that they do is that, on this one mountain, you can be on one side and have, dozens, I guess hundreds of species, and then literally just cross the pass over to the other side. That is enough of a divide for those species that they are not passing. At least not now. Some ancestor clearly was, but you have a whole different suite of birds on this side, and you can really see how the habitat has changed so much here. We would get things like white-browed conebill. One of the big crowd pleasers. This got a lot of oohs and ahs. A fairly common species, but still, when something like a scarlet-bellied mountain tanager pops up, you pay attention. White-throated tyrannulate, a very cool flycatcher, crowd chat tyrant. The one thing I'll point out and I'll admit to here, some of my photos start getting a little worse, a little out of focus because at this point we're a couple days after Machu Picchu, where I picked up what I guess was some sort of cold. I thought it was a sinus infection. Um, Apparently being around 3,000 people at Machu Picchu on that train, I caught something. Then being up at elevation, whatever pressure was going on in my head, this was about the worst I think I've ever felt, which is not the most fun thing when you're also trying to point birds out to people. But we had some really cool species. This was one Paramo seed eater. We had kind of a funny one looking back on because after things like mountain tanagers and funky looking flycatchers, just another seed eater is kind of funny, but for Jesse, again, who lives in Peru, it's fun to kind of listen to the way that he reacts to birds when he calls them out. As he says, if his voice goes up a few octaves, like you should pay attention. His voice really went up when he called out this Paramo seed eater, and it's a fairly wide-ranging species. Excuse me, but always in low densities. It is just excuse me, overall a pretty rare bird. It was his first time actually ever seeing one in Peru, so kind of a cool one. To get Jesse a lifer, at least a Peruvian lifer, on the trip is it means it's a good one. A bad photo, but a distant bird. I just like that it's doing the things that wrens do. This is a grass wren, a species that was split from sedge wren. So acts very different sound, excuse me, acts very similar, sounds very different. But up in this very cool, up in these ferns was a cool way to see it. Bad photo, but kind of a fun way to see it. This backlit sword-billed hummingbird where that bill is basically the length of the body. Um, Another one of these cool specialty species. Uh, Here's where I could tell you I was really struggling. I couldn't even tell if this bird was in focus, which is too bad because here's another fernarid, a pearled tree runner. That was the best photo I got of it. I swear it looked in focus when I took it. Here's the evidence. Ken Janes, who is standing right next to me, this was the photo he was able to get of it, which is um, that's a photo I want. That's incredible. We'll share out the trip report, the eBird trip report. We'll get online soon so you can see everyone's photos, but I figured I would just use mine to make it at least authentic. On our way back down, we did pick up a few more species we had been looking for. Tufted tit tyrant, great bird, funny name. And I feel like any photo you see of this, it looks like the most unamused bird. It always has this kind of like droopy-eyed look, a very funny species. We had seen this before, but cream-crested spinetail gave us a slightly better view. Very cool. That cream crest, but that white face, another fernarid, and an endemic. Andean flicker was a cool pickup. Um, Folks probably know our northern flickers up here, and this one just looks like someone gave it a nice makeover. You got to celebrate, as we said, do as the Peruvians. So this night, a few of us decided to try cuy, um, the local delicacy, also known as guinea pig. Um, Again, I don't know if I'll have it again, but fun to try. Um, Kind of like a dark meat. Excuse me. Now our final hike up here. We'll do this quickly, and I'll be wrapping up shortly here. But getting up to the highest part, and this is when we're actually, instead of just working the different slopes, we are birding the pass here. This is basically the high point of Abra Malaga. Um, this is getting us, we're over 14,000 feet at this point. Honestly, just, every few steps we needed to stop and take a bit of a break, but our ultimate goal was to get into yet another unique habitat I'll talk about in a second. We lucked out where as soon as we stepped out of the bus, one bird we had been looking for the last couple of days, glacier finch, was just waiting for us basically in the parking lot where we had stopped. Anytime you put the word glacier in a bird's name, you know it's going to be a cool one. And this big finch with especially the white in the face, it was very cool. So talk about a unique habitat. This is getting up into that almost tundra-like habitat for us. These little ponds, we would see things like Andean geese. I think there's one right up there. Hiking along the trail was this really cool, this little kind of what's the right word for it? Little like microflora growing, probably as large as any of these plants are going to get. Here's the zoomed in view, but that's just what's underfoot all along the trails up here. Um, our goal was to get up into what's called polylepis forest, many layered, in reference to these trees. The bark kind of has this way of like peeling off. Um, this is one of the few trees that actually grows in the area, and it's unfortunately threatened uh, because it's largely being used for firewood. So a lot of the local people, again, need to be able to have fires, need to have firewood, and these polylepis forests are kind of the only place to be getting a lot of wood up there. Um, there seems to be more effort to conserve a lot of these areas, but unfortunately, so much of it has been cut already that I don't know, it's tough. So this kind of everything we're looking at, especially on like the left side here, is some of that polylepis, again, growing at this really high altitude. These are, it's a very slow growing, stunted tree, um, but attracts some real specialty species. Great sapphire wing is a large hummingbird that can be found even down to lower elevations. We encountered one up there. The cooler specialty one up there was this blue mantled thornbill. Thornbills are really cool. A very small bill on them, unlike most hummingbirds that are, feeding on these, often specialized flowers. The ones up there, the flowers that they're going after are these short little, red tubular, still what hummingbirds love, but growing on the ground. And instead of hovering to feed, thornbills usually are just kind of like almost hopping around on the ground, going flower to flower. So um, it's a fun one. If you look up photos of this, most of the photos you'll see of them aren't perched up like this. They're sitting down on the ground, which is just kind of funky to realize like that's where the flowers are. But again, here's our polylepis looking for some of the more specialty species. Line-fronted canistero here. We were lucky to get into. You can notice a few little raindrops starting to form in the background. Um, Here's the range. Again, high elevation, getting into Bolivia a little bit. This is, excuse me, a threatened species, or currently threatened, again, just because they're so specialized in that habitat. And then the other one of my biggest targets that I was really hoping to see, especially, because they are so restricted to these areas and they are more threatened. This is called white-browed tit spinetail. You can see the kind of those spines there. There's the range again, and this almost overstates it because it's not like there's all polylepis forest in that range. It'd be fun to see like a more refined map of just how little and how few areas a species like this has back. So these are now listed as endangered. So we're lucky to get to see them. I know it's 7:46. My goal is to wrap up well quickly here. As I mentioned, I've got way too many slides, but bear with me. Just the last few. We're wrapping up here. We made a few extra stops looking for other birds. It's fun to see kind of the places that are really geared towards tourism, especially for birders. Some of these hummingbird feeders we would visit. This is essentially just someone's backyard. But they've realized, they can put up lots of feeders, lots of native plants, and it attracts all sorts of birds, especially lots of hummingbirds, from the small Tyrian metaltail to the absolutely tiny white-bellied wood star. Wood stars are so small you'd almost think they were like a large bee buzzing around. On the other end of the spectrum were some of the larger white-tufted sunbeam. This is an endemic, excuse me, hummingbird in the area. Um, Shining sunbeam is perhaps better known, not endemic, but if you want a homework assignment, go on eBird or Merlin, look up Shining Sunbeam. There's a very cute poem that they've included in the whatever the description of that species. Shining sunbeam, you are my shining sunbeam. All the way up to, oh, I forgot to label it, but the giant hummingbird, largest hummingbird. I think it's an 8-inch wingspan, or excuse me, 8-inch length. Gosh, I should have written this down. It's massive. This is a huge hummingbird. It is the largest hummingbird. It almost looked like a swift flying around versus a hummingbird. Like the way its wing beats are almost like so slow you actually see them, which like instead of the that quick buzz that you think of most hummingbirds. These things were incredible. I think the last bird I've got to mention, we hit a few other spots kind of on our way out back to Cusco, including some more lakes and ponds and things, and picking up Chilean flamingos, a really nice way to wrap up the birding. So, our last day, the last couple things I'll mention here, we love when we can also include a bit of the culture in these tours. Cusco was kind of a famous what's the right word for it? It was the capital of the Inca Empire. So getting to kind of see the history, and then unfortunately, as we see here, the Spaniards came in and decided to just essentially build a castle on top of. You can see some of the stone down here were from when the Inca were present, um, and then leave it to the Spaniards to come in and wipe out their most sacred place and then just build a castle on top of it. Um, Fun to kind of let Ra do his thing, teach us about the history, show us kind of the true Inca stone that is perfectly cut, no mortar used. Absolutely incredible that they were doing this without power tools. Where modern day, even with the tools we have, we can't do it quite as great, and we can do it much worse too. So fun to kind of see that bit of history in these towns, cities. Obviously, with all the alpaca around, getting some authentic Peruvian alpaca fur was kind of a fun thing for us to be able to do in Cusco, getting to go into um, some of these stores that actually are selling the, true authentic product, getting a nice kind of lesson in all of that. And then ultimately we flew back to Lima where we would have, excuse me, our final dinner, which is always a fun thing to kind of go through the tour. We all share like our favorite birds, our favorite highlights, um, have our last, excuse me, dinners, whatever it is, ceviche, there's the word, uh, is really a nice way to cap off the tour. I'm so bummed. I forgot I'm missing one photo here. One of our favorite places, as we talked about, and it's the photo I saved for this, but is apparently not my next slide. There was this amazing little cafe up at the top of the mountain, right where that trailhead was. And I guess for the sake of tonight being 7:50 already, I'll just say you got to go check it out yourself. This incredible little spot actually ended up being voted higher for us than I think. Um, Machu Picchu is really cool. All this was amazing, but getting to be up in Abra, Malaga in the Sacred Valley, getting to see those um, the way local people are living and with all the cool birds and wildlife around them was truly incredible. So as I wrap up here, I'll just say, can't thank the folks in this photo enough. These were the intrepid travelers that came with us, especially Jesse on the left here. Our guide has been wonderful to do these trips with. I was gonna tell some side stories if I had extra time, but I don't. So I'll save those. If you saw in the description, I said that I would tell a story about not getting in a car with strangers. That's the takeaway. Don't do that. But I'll wrap up here with just a quick plug. We do have some more trips now on the books with field guides doing some a goal is to do, some more domestic and more international trips, one, maybe two a year, depending on how the schedules turn out. So I'll make the quick plug. We have dates now, early May, right before our warbler walks start, before migration really picks up here in Maine. Let's go see some birds that are coming back to, especially the south and west. To do that, let's go to Southeast Arizona. Field Guides has this great, excuse me, 5 day trip, mostly focused on night birds, everything. Well, I'm like the tiny elf owl here, but getting to do this really cool loop. I've done all of this before, and it's some of the coolest birding you can have in the United States. Next year, they have this trip called Holiday at San Isidro. It does fall over Thanksgiving, but that can actually be a really fun time to also get away, or bring the whole family. But the fun thing with this, we'll fly into Quito. There's one stop, and then the rest of the tour is all based out of one location. So not so much packing up and moving around. Um, but between these two spots, you can pick up something like 300 species of birds, which I guess I'm missing my summary slide. We ended up with a little over 200 species in Peru, which for especially being up at elevation, again, many of those, a nice bunch of endemics and lots of things like hummingbirds, you name it. We did really well for the area we covered. Um, the last one I'll mention here, getting us into 2026. Uh, um, Jamaica is one place I've long wanted to go. Talking to some of the field guides about it. There's 28 endemic species in Jamaica. Things like these awesome little toadies, Jamaican toady, um, some really cool new families, and fun to do it all on. Um, you know, Thing about March, late March in Maine, the last place you want to be is in Maine. The first place you want to be is with me in Jamaica. Um, that said, what I would recommend, on Maine Audubon's website, I'm going to update this page. We have a trip report up. You can just search Peru, or it's on the homepage right now, but I'll include uh, some links, if you want to see uh, more information on these trips. All right. Before I lose my voice, and because it's so late, I will say thank you all for bearing with me throughout this. I hope you learned a bit. There's so much more to be said about Peru and these trips. Again, I'll thank everyone. Actually, I see Gail. Oh, I thought I saw some other folks. Some of the folks on this trip were on tonight. I thank them so much. This was super fun. I hope to see you all at some of our birding basics talks, other things coming up this winter. And as always, make sure you renew your membership, become a Maine Audubon member, support the cool work we're doing here and abroad. Um, and yeah, I saw a couple comments. I have cut my hair since a lot of our past Zooms. It's nice to feel so free. Nice to see lots of familiar names and faces here. We'll get this recording up on YouTube probably soon. But again, thank you all so much. Have a great night. Take care.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Susan.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, you too, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks. Have a good night.